Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. My guest is going to tell us a story about his brother that passed away and some activity that he experienced after that. So if you would like to just introduce yourself and then tell us your story about your brother.
Well, thank you, Christine. It's a real honor to be on the podcast with you. As you and I have known about each other, but this is the first time we've seen each other's face in real time, I think. And I know you're a very high esteemed fellow at the City University. I'm going to give you a little bit about my background and who I am, and some of the more recent things that I've done. And I kind of have a little script here, but once I get to the actual story that we're here to talk about, that's just going to be off the top of my head. And for a couple of reasons is that I always say that if you tell the truth, you can tell it over and over again. You don't use the same words, but it still has the same essence to it. But the scripted part I do want to get to, and then I'll go to the story. I'm an artificial intelligence ethics researcher, which, if I'm being honest, means I have more questions than answers. I find AI dialogue, even at the highest industry levels, to be interesting, but not necessarily overly informative. Because at the end of the current day, the AI industry is selling a product that doesn't quite exist. I'm an AI certificate holder from Oxford University, studying under Rob Collins, and have taken Professor Sedha Jamthi's AI bootcamp for business at Stanford. I hold several certificates from Harvard, one taught by the business school, one taught by the medical school faculty. My interest is always from the ethics vantage, with the goal of bringing back new learning to my students. I'm a professor at City University. I'm an alumnus there as well. I have a bachelor's and master's degree from City U, and I have a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Washington. So my story today is about loss and healing. While it may seem fantastical and personal, it's not outside the reach of science or personal spirituality, in my opinion. I want to start with the science aspect, and I'm going to start with some research and very kind of novice information related to string theory. String theory suggests that an excitement or stimulus at a point in the universe would be reacted by a particle across the universe. I like that concept because it considers energy and not just physicality. Life and consciousness, to me, is energy, which, although derived from a physical being, is theoretically able to continue. Death, on the other hand, is the end of physicality, but not the end of energy. Science suggests energy is not destroyed. Taking those two vantage points, string theory and eternal energy, I theorize that thought energy continues to exist after the physical expiration of the thought generator, which is the brain, all without the benefit of artificial intelligence. So in humanness is that the soul. So now I'm going to turn to the personal spirituality of my story. I grew up in farm country in Northeast Colorado, and that's where the story of my loss begins. My brother died in January of 1990. By that point, I'd already left the farm in Colorado, had spent a time in the military, and was living in Seattle. So I'd like to relate a dream I had about my deceased brother. And in the dream, it starts out on the shore, and I see my brother, and his name is Tom. He was my half brother, so his last name is Reyes. Uh, my brother Tom is on a raft in the ocean. Uh, and he's quite a ways away from me, and he floats towards me, but then he floats away. So to me, that was indicative of his inability to cross back over into the realm where I was residing. But because of my faith beliefs, personal faith beliefs, uh, I had no problem crossing over in my mind to go to see him. And so I was curious as to what it was that he was hoping to communicate about. So as I started to walk off the beach and on to the water, a massive dream catcher appeared. And it's weird because my family doesn't identify as your traditional Native American family. I have Native American cousins and other relatives, but a dream catcher to me doesn't have any particular meaning or even place in my culture. My culture is more of a Mexican American culture. So I walked through the dream catcher. My flesh and my flesh is torn away, and for an instant, at least in my dream, I was just a skeleton. But almost instantaneously, I guess I turned back into myself. And I guess in retrospect, I haven't really sorted it out, but perhaps that was the manifestation of spirit standing apart from physicality. I walked to my brother on the water and stood there, and I said to myself, well, I know I'm dreaming, and I don't want to predispose how this dream's going to play out. So I'm going to ask him an open question. And I said, how are you? He says, I'm fine. I'm happy. And he says, but I have a problem. And I asked him, well, what's your problem? And he said, every time I visit mother, she traps me in sadness. And that was essentially the end of the dream. And I woke up and I thought to myself, well, it was a dream. I didn't really try to control the dream, but I do kind of have a task, and I'm not sure exactly how to approach task, but I'll think about it, and I'm sure I'll sort something out. So I went to see my mom, and I told her about the dream, and I said, Mom, I think what Tommy is saying is that he comes to visit you, and his essence, you can feel that. But when you feel it, you're overwhelmed with sadness. And what he wants you to know is he's happy, and he wants you to embrace something other than the loss that you're feeling. That is really the end of that part of the story. And I'm going to shift now to a different event involving the same brother. Back in 1977, I was living in Northeast Colorado, still on the farm. My brother had just got back from the Army, and he asked me one night, "Can I borrow your car?" And I said, "Well, I guess. Why? Why do you need my car?" And he says, "We'll have a date." All right. And then he says, "Do you mind? My friend Curtis from the Army is coming into town. Do you mind showing him around?" And I said, "Why don't you show him around?" He says, "Because I have a date." Said, all right, I'll show the guy around because I had a pickup. And Curtis shows up. I never met him before, and I instantly did not like Curtis. And the reason I didn't like Curtis was because he was very handsome. And that's, you can't overcome handsome in a small town. The girls were going to gravitate towards him. So anyway, Curtis and I hung out together. I was probably not on my best behavior, but nothing really came up. I never saw Curtis again. He probably attended my brother's funeral in 1990, but I don't remember him being there. But after my brother's death, Curtis Curtis right now is a math professor at Glendale Community College in Glendale, Arizona. So, uh, and just to kind of give you a little bit more background, my brother Tom was the oldest boy in our family, and then in between he and I have another stepbrother whose name was uh, Jonathan, Jonathan J. Reyes, and my name is John Max Torres. So my brother would come to Curtis in Curtis's dreams, and he would say, "I need your help," and so Curtis would have to go figure out what's going on, and so he'd call up my brother's widow, and invariably something was going on that he could help. Now she still lived in Colorado, but Curtis owned property in Iowa, so they always drove through that town on the way to Iowa. So he'd stop there and do whatever fixing needed to be done, and that seemed to suffice my brother's restless spirit for a while. Well, about I guess maybe 12 years ago, my brother comes to Curtis in a dream. And keep in mind, Curtis and I had not connected yet or reconnected. And he says, "I need your help." So Curtis calls up the widow, Rose, and says, "Rose, what's going on?" "Well, nothing's going on." And my brother keeps coming to Curtis night after night. And Curtis wakes up one night covered with sweat. And Curtis, even though he's a math professor, he didn't really use the computer and hardly anything on the internet. So Curtis does the only thing that he could think of doing. He types in my brother's name on a search engine. And the first thing that pops up is a picture of my brother in his army uniform. And the caption says, "I'm looking for my dad." And it turned out that my brother had been in a relationship with I believe, I think it was Black Crow. I think she was a Crow, Native American from Montana. The reason I say I think it was Crow because I know that Curtis, or not Curtis, Jonathan, John is the name of my nephew, and his wife are Crow and Cheyenne, respectively. But anyway, a picture of John comes up, or a picture of my brother comes up on John's posting, and Curtis calls up Rose and says, "Hey, look, this is a family issue. I'm not going to reach out to this guy." So Rose's daughter, my niece Aubrey, starts reaching out, gets in connection with this young man. Pretty soon, we're all talking to him, and I wanted to go meet John, and so I had gone to Colorado to take my brother, or take my dad, I apologize, to see his brother. And I was in Denver, and I called up John and I said, "Hey, I'm heading up to Billings. I want to see you." He's like, "Uncle Max, I thought you were coming tomorrow." I'm like, "No, I'm literally getting on the airplane. So please, will you pick me up?" He said, "Yeah, I will." He lives in Crow's Agency, which is, it's not too far from Billings, but it's a drive. So I fly in and meet John. Now, an interesting thing about John, he had been adopted by a Caucasian family, loves his parents, good people, and they named him Jonathan Maxwell, which my older brother was Jonathan, and my middle name is Max. So that's an interesting coincidence, even in and of itself. So I met with John, and we just kind of hung out, had some Chinese food, and went to a bar on the south part of Billings, Montana. And we're sitting on the second floor, and it was in the open area on a balcony, and drinking beer and tequila, and just talking. And he gets a phone call, and he says, "Oh, hey, Curtis, I'm here with my Uncle Max in Billings, Montana. Where are you?" And off in the distance, because we're on the second floor of the edge of Billings, Montana, you can see as far off as you can see, we see this red pickup driving towards us, the only car on the highway. And John goes, well, what are you driving? And he goes, huh, I think I can see you. And Curtis drives up to this bar, and here we are, Jonathan Baratusk, a nephew I'd never met, and Curtis Gentry, a guy I hadn't seen for 30 years. And the only thing we had in common was a person that had been passed away for, a couple of decades. So after that, Curtis and I reconnected. And he's still a handsome guy. And his wife and my wife are good friends, and he was part of the reason I moved down to Arizona. Now, the the lesson, I guess, is that you can think of things from a very spiritual sense, and the problem is that you can't necessarily medicate yourself or guru yourself into some kind of spiritual connection. I don't think we get that choice. I think it comes upon us, and we just, if we're observant, we can go along for the ride, and it can be an amazing thing. Uh, but I believe, because of yin and yang, of things, that when you do that, there's always a risk of the negatives are going to come back and hit you really hard. So you have to still yourself for that as well. And I guess, but I think there's also a scientific element here. And it goes back to my string theory, but it also goes back to probability. And I tell people, what's the probability of three people sitting on a speck of dust in the middle of infinity? And that's the only thing that they have in common, is somebody that's been dead for decades in that instance. And so that's where I look at both the scientific elements and the spiritual elements. I'm a very scientific minded person, and I believe in science. But I also recognize that energy around us, it's a little bit like taking a building and having somebody who knows nothing about energy putting in an air conditioning system that all the parts are there, but none of it works right, versus somebody who actually takes those exact same parts and engineers an efficient air conditioning system. And that's how I look about spirituality. It's there for all of us. You can fragment it into your existence, but it doesn't really do anything for you. Or you can find some kind of organizational way of contemplation, whether that's reading, texts that are inspired texts, whether it's, being an atheist, reading, just science text. I think the organization of the mind allows for an exploration of possibilities that are outside of our physical containment. So that's my story. What do you think?
I've told you before I was going to love this story, and I do. I have a question. Does your brother still visit you or Curtis at all, or no?
I think he might have visited Curtis, but it's really tailed off since Curtis and I got together. And he doesn't visit me. Can't remember of another time. I will say something about Jonathan Bertusk, my nephew. He's a world-class artist, and he had they call it solar art, where you take a magnifying glass and you burn it into images into wood. And he burned an image of Obama as president with the presidential seal, and that hung in the White House during Obama's presidency.
Wow.
Yeah, so a very impressive person.
That's really cool. As a mom who lost a child myself, I one thing that stuck with me is when you said that you went to your mom and said that your brother told you that he felt trapped by her sadness. I'm curious, what was her reaction to that? Because I would have, if somebody said that to me as a mom, if somebody said, your son visits you and he feels trapped by your sadness, that would impact me.
That's a great question. I My mom was a very spiritual person as well. Uh, she had 10 kids. One of them passed as a child. And she'd always often talk about Bonnie Jean, the daughter who left. And she would say her name. And so uh, I think she had at least uh, because of that experience and really kind of keeping that person alive in her mind. Because when you have loss, whether it's loss of a person, loss of a marriage, loss of a job, your whole future vanishes in front of you is what you thought it was going to look like. And I think because the way she kept Bonnie Jean alive in her mind, because Bonnie Jean dying as a baby, as an infant, uh, didn't have a lot of history, but had a lot of possibility. And even Curtis tells me, we talk about Tom, and I always say, yeah, that guy had a lot of upside, and it's a loss. But I think we are where we are, and I think for my mom, uh, I think she was able to maybe find a parallelism there and how to deal with that, and the idea that this person can still exist in your heart, in your hopes, in your thoughts, and you can give voice to that person. I don't know. My mom wasn't much of a talker about things, but that's my hope.
Yeah, no, I can relate. I can relate to just about everything you just said there. That makes perfect sense to me. So, yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add for our listeners at all?
The only thing I would add is that even though this story, like I said, sounds fantastical and personal, it's a real story. I gave you real names. You can cross reference them there. I think you can find them on Google. I know you can with in Curtis's case. John runs or did. He ran the gift shop up at Custer's Last Stand for a while. I'm not sure if he's still doing that. Um, and then there's the science part of it, and I just think that no matter from which direction a person comes to it, uh, I think that they have the tools that they need, and they don't have to open themselves up to potential hurt. They can still be guarded, but I think that when it comes to healing, the hardest part is to say it's okay to be happy now. And if you can find that, and that's a deeply personal place for each one of us, that private place that we have. And some people find it through prayer, some people find it through meditation, some people find it from running marathons. Wherever that's at, uh, you deserve to go there, find it, and find that peace. So that's my advice.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I happen to believe that, yeah, we don't lose the sadness, but that we have to kind of absorb that and learn to be happy again, but we don't lose, the sad memories, but we try to, at least I try to focus on positive memories um, for the people that I've lost for sure. So, but
Yeah, I mean, because I've lost both my parents are now gone, and I was really fond of my grandfather who passed away, and uh, uh, I think that maybe I just have an overactive imagination, but I do reach out to them, at least in my minds, in my thought, my meditations, uh, because I think so much of, and this idea about AI too, right? They're going to plug us in and put it on a floppy disk somewhere. But anyway, uh, and that's who we are. But I think that people still exist in our memories, and they're part of us because there's an idea that nothing exists except because of our own consciousness. I don't know if that's true. I think stuff exists even if we're not around. But I think that the memories and stuff like that, uh, you can make a connection, like the string theory idea. And the string theory works both ways. I mean, if you have a positive, uh, kind of stimulus, the other string reacts positively. if you have a negative stimulus, the strings that are disjointed from it, except through this kind of theoretical connection, they actually act with chaos. That's what I've read. I'm not a scientist in that area, but I mean, if you just take that idea and think about loss and sadness versus loss and joy, then you can maybe bring forth the joy because you know that you become a vessel, and that you're allowing the joy to then reflect back on that person who may not be with us physically, but maybe they're there embracing us, and so it's
Great way to describe it. I have not thought about it that way before. It's a great way to describe that, though. I like it. Well,
well, I'm
Max,
excited.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm excited about your podcasts.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. It was very nice to meet you face to face, or see your face. So on my screen here, I know I'll see you in email form, of course, at work. But thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.